Dude, you are getting well. Dude Nation, welcome. This is your host, Ben Curtis, and I'm so excited for this new season and for this special guest. February is Men's Mental Health Month. It's a great opportunity to start to really take a closer look at what you're already doing to take care of yourself and what you could be doing that you're not doing yet. And I really want to encourage you, if you haven't already, to go ahead and get your tickets for DudeCon. It's the Global Men's Summit for Healthy Masculinity. And we have 10 incredible speakers from around the globe, each specialists in their own area. And today I am very excited and honored to highlight a speaker who's a co-founder of DudeCon and one of the main speakers there, who's an expert on sexual trauma for men and also a sex and intimacy coach. So let's give a big warm dude welcome to Amy BLISS. Dude.
Hi.
I need to get the canned clapping in here soon. Haven't quite worked that out.
This.
Yeah. Amy BLISS, let's go. Yes, so welcome, Amy.
Thank you.
Yeah. This isn't your first rodeo with us here on this show. And I'm so grateful to have you back. So thanks for saying yes.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here.
Well, we're going to dive in today. If you're listening live or on the podcast, you can drop in questions anytime from wherever you're watching, and we would love to answer them. I'll keep an eye out for it. And even if you're watching after the show at some point, you can still send Amy or I a message at any time to get that answered, because, maybe in front of an audience, it can be, or you don't want to post everything on there. Send us a message. We would still love to make that happen. So Amy, you help support men around sexual trauma, sex and intimacy. How did you get into this, and why men, and why you?
Yeah, that's an interesting convoluted story. I'll try to sum it up. So when I left the corporate space about 20 years, or after 20 years, I did that about 10 years ago. I dove into the female empowerment space, which was really blossoming at that time. But the whole time I'm in it, and I'm learning, and I'm teaching, and I'm holding space for women, there's this voice in the back of my head that was like, where is this for men? Men need this too. And after that voice kept getting louder and louder and louder, my business partner at the time stopped and said, you know what? I think you're supposed to work with men. And that was like this moment. And so that was back in 2014, 2015. And I kind of dove into the men's space. And during that time, I was getting my certification as a sex, intimacy, and relationship coach, where I had planned on focusing on men and men's sexual health. And my very first practice client was with a man who had, and I do have his permission to talk about this. He had experienced horrific sexual trauma as a child, and we just had the most beautiful experience. He was so open and so wanting his sex and sexuality life to be different. And he just kind of dove into the work, and something clicked in me. And so that's kind of been a passion of mine, because it's an epidemic that we're really not talking about. And so I want to be part of the change, and I want to let men know who've experienced this, that there is something beyond what happened to them.
Wow. That's it. We're done. Thank you. Good night. Yeah, it's so well, you're clearly like we're connected because yesterday I was posting about this epidemic that we're not talking about. So, Amy, from your perspective, what's the epidemic we're not talking about?
Yeah. So when people hear about sexual trauma, most people will immediately assume that it's happening to a woman or a child. And we totally forget about men, or even boys. And which is fascinating because we hear so much about the sexual abuse that's rampant in the Catholic Church, in the evangelical space, in the Boy Scout space, and a lot of those victims are boys. And so if you were to Google sexual trauma in men, you would find that it says 1 in 6 men experience some sort of sexual trauma before the age of 18. And that number is, to me, actually very low. To those of us that work in the space, we think the number is closer to 1 in 5 or 1 in 4. And I think that there's a reason for that. The main reason being that it takes, on average, a man or a male identifying person to say, it takes them on average 30 years for them to even just to admit to another human being, much less to a medical professional, that this happened to them. So if you think about that, if it takes 30 years on average to raise your hand and say, this happened to me, then there are so many people who take this to their grave and don't ever talk about it. So we think the numbers are greatly underreported.
Mm,
And I think that there's a lot of reasons for that. I think that there's a lot of stigma attached to this. There's it impacts men in a different way, because it impacts who they are as a man and their masculinity in a way that is a different impact than to people who identify in other ways. And the other issue is that we as a society, at least in the Western world, tend to rally around women. When a woman says, this happened to me, we
mhm,
rally around her. And while there
mhm,
is still a lot of bias in the judicial space for female victims, from an emotional support space, we rally around women. Whereas men, oftentimes, either this is their reality or this is the fear. In oftentimes when a man says this happened to me, most people don't know how to handle that, and so they have one of two responses. The
mm.
first is, no, that doesn't happen. Men can't be sexually assaulted. And the other is, even if they believe it, they don't know how to handle it. And they're like, oh gosh, I'm sorry that happened to you. Oh, I gotta go. I'll see ya. There is that separation, and men are left isolated. And there's, the fear that they're going to be seen as less than because this happened to them. In fact, I
Mm.
used the word victim earlier, and I generally don't, because I know most men who have experienced this don't identify with the word victim.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
It's this is really fascinating for me. I'm thinking about I used to really identify as a victim, and I think that was one of my things that made me a unique man. But we can actually really get responsible about that. Like I hear I'm taking a lot of notes here. So if you're just catching
Yeah.
up or just dropping in, look at the chat. All the quotes and facts are right here. I just want to highlight a few things that you said. And also to those of you who are watching, thank you for watching. Please comment on what you're hearing that's resonating, or tag someone who you feel like this could make a difference for, or share this with them. Um, where is this work for men? And uh, I want men to know that there's more than what happened to you. And 1 in 6 men experience sexual trauma before the age of 18. We've been so grateful to have Anthony Edwards on this show, who's the chair of 1in6.org, that organization, speaking on this. He identifies himself as one of those men who have experienced it, and um, also rightfully so, that has shared from that experience, and as your professional experience, that we have the quote here. Statistically, for those of us who work in that space, we're really clear that number is quite low, and it can take up to 30 years to share to talk about it. So most people are going to their grave with it. So you actually think it's closer to 1 in 4 or 1 in 5.
Yeah.
So I've highlighted all that. I'm just reading what we have here. And that when a man says this happened to him, most people don't know how to handle it.
Yep.
One of the things we've been cultivating in Dude School and in Dude Nation even is working with anger and rage in men. And even in myself and my own relationships at times, I found I don't seem to have permission to express my anger without someone feeling threatened, even if I'm taking full responsibility for it. So I'm thinking, wow, if I don't feel safe to express my anger outside of maybe a men's group or something, where am I going to talk about the sexual stuff? And this is from a guy who, like, I've been in therapy for 30 years. My mom raised me to talk about my feelings. So if it's this challenging for me, I can only imagine how it might be for other men.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the anger piece because we in conversations we've had in the past,
Mhm.
we don't allow men to express the full range of emotion, and so much gets channeled into anger. So if you think
Mm.
about not having a place to put all of the emotions that come up from this trauma, that would generally get channeled into anger, and if there's no outlet for that, where does that go?
Yeah, that's a great question. And anger is one of those important stages of grief,
Yes.
actually. Um,
100%.
so we actually need it. We need to welcome it and get curious about it.
Yeah.
What do you find for those men who or anyone who's experienced sexual trauma who, is not even close to talking about it, like what might be a first step?
Yeah.
Yeah, what might be a first step?
I think for a lot of men, and I apologize to those that this does not resonate with, um, is first forgiving yourself. I think
Mm,
that we as a society have said that men can't be traumatized in this way because by sheer fact of being male bodied, you should be able to extricate yourself from some situation.
mm,
And that is part of the disbelief that happens around when men say this happened to them, even within the therapeutic space. I mean, therapists are human and they come in with their own biases. And if they have an underlying belief that by sheer fact of being male, you can extricate yourself from a situation, and that extends down to kids as young as 3. And I'm sorry, but how is a 3-year-old or an 8-year-old or an 11-year-old supposed to extricate themselves from a situation where an adult means them harm?
hmm.
And that
Especially
is
during a pandemic,
yes. I
right?
mean, there was so much abuse that escalated during that time
Mm,
on all levels. Um, but one of the things that I emphasize with the men that I work with and the men that I speak with is that this this happened to you. This isn't who you are.
mm,
And most people, when they think back to things that happened in their past, in their childhood, they put themselves in that situation in the form they are now. And I have a friend who is very open about his sexual trauma, and he had a lot of anger and resentment towards himself that he should have been able to stop this. Well,
mm,
he was 11 years old when a group of older teenagers attacked him, and it wasn't until his nephew was 11 and he saw what an 11-year-old boy looks like that he started to forgive himself because he realized in looking at his 11-year-old nephew is this, the scrawny little kid that he's like, well, of course I wasn't going to be able to get away from this group of kids that meant me harm. Like they were twice my size. But he had always imagined himself in his adult form and not as a skinny little kid.
hmm.
And so I think that the first step is starting to forgive yourself and realizing that this happened to you and there was nothing you could have done in that situation. If it happened to you as a child, if it happened to you as an adult, then there's a lot of conditioning that men have experienced. And I've worked with several men who um statistically it's more likely that men will be abused by other men, but men can be abused by women. Even as an adult, we have instilled in men that you are supposed to want sex if it is presented to you. And if you're in a situation where you really don't want and are very pressured or bribed or tricked or whatever into having sex, that is trauma. If
Mm,
you're if you don't want it. And there is a lot of stigma around that. So it's beginning to start to forgive yourself and then start seeking help should you be in a place where you want to, or that feels like you have access to that. um, to start to separate what happened to you from who
mhm.
you are as a sexual being. And that's largely the work that I do.
Wow, thank you. It's really clear and poignant for me, the way you can say, like, split what happened and who you are, and that, you can get curious about who you are. I've been in some transformational weekend spaces, and often this comes up, like, at some point it's sexual trauma. Usually it's a woman because
Mhm.
it's, she's we're working on the father wound, and ultimately some man has abused their daughter, and the woman is able to come forward so that everyone can get underneath them. And I just notice how rarely, a man will go up there to say that. And um also, one thing I got out of that experience was watching a leader work with a woman who'd been through this, a person who had been through this, was that start to say yes, and what about, like, and what, like, who do you want to be? Like, that is, if you carry that as like your scarlet letter, or your, like, scar of Cain on your face forever, like, you don't have to live victimized by it. And what it reminds me of, is, like, after September 11th, I was that's when, sort of the height of the Dell campaign, I was most famous and literally having TV interviews every day. And um kind of the only thing, there was just so much fear there. But wow, I lost my train of thought for a second. Um
Trauma, September 11th.
yeah, it was around, oh yeah, thank you. The
Mhm,
victim thing. So it was that,
mhm,
I wore that as a badge of honor.
mhm.
Like, I would say, if you met me, like, out to dinner with friends, like, by the end of the conversation, you would hear me say, "I'm a victim of 9/11." And that was, like, part of my MO. And I
Mhm.
actually realized I was literally reliving that trauma over and over and over by continually presenting myself as that, as a victim.
Yeah.
And I couldn't actually heal, and I was in this really intense cycle of self-sabotage because I was living the life of a victim. I was becoming more successful, uh, in business as an actor than ever before. I was making more money than ever before, and I felt, and was very still misunderstood. No one stopped to say, like, "Are you okay? Do you need professional help?" It was like, why aren't you showing up for your audition?" And I had undiagnosed PTSD, and I was using drugs and alcohol to self-medicate. And so I couldn't stop the cycle. I didn't know how. Literally, it took many interventions, divine and human, um, and so much desperation and loss of everything. So I've ever since then, I've been curious, like, can we not have to, like, get destroy ourselves and be down on our knees and lose everything before we ask for help
Yeah,
or share what's going on?
yeah,
Had I actually just been able to say, like, "I'm not okay," I didn't even feel permission to do that. I felt like I just had to show up, because that's what there was to do the job, because anyone in my position would be grateful, right? So I think about how that might play out in sexual trauma.
yeah. I mean, we as a society tell boys, "Get up, shake it off, rub some dirt in it, go on, shove it down, man up." And there are some things that need to be addressed because you shove them down for too long and they're going to come out in a way that is dangerous to either you or those around you.
Mm,
I mean, you turned inward, with drugs and alcohol, and
mhm,
other people turn outwards to violence.
mhm,
And, that's not, that's, there's other ways, and I'm not judging that. I mean, we've created this in our society with the way we indoctrinate and condition boys and what a
Mhm.
man is supposed to be and what masculinity is supposed to be, and this runs counter to that. Asking for help, or being expressing that someone was able to abuse you
Mhm.
in any way. But the
Mhm.
sexual abuse is even more detrimental, and this is not to diminish abuse of other forms. It infiltrates so many aspects of who you are as a man. I've talked with so many men who identify as gay or bisexual, who question whether their sexuality was influenced by what happened to them. Because again, most perpetrators are, interestingly, most perpetrators who abuse boys identify as heterosexual. And
Wow.
so, yeah, and so there is this insidious thing that just develops in the people who have experienced this, of what was it about me that, so if you identify as straight, then you're like, well, what was it about me that caused this man who also identifies as straight to do this to me? And oftentimes, not that girls aren't groomed, but boys tend to be groomed more often in this space. And
Mhm.
so it's not a one-time spur of the moment thing. It is something that is methodical and planned out. And I did not turn off my phone. I'm sorry.
All good. I can't hear it.
Okay, good. I can. It's distracting me. But so um the okay, that's the last ring. Okay. Now I got my get my train of thought back. Sorry about that.
All good.
So what ends up happening is these men will say to the person who is experiencing this, is trying to not use the V word, is that they'll say, I don't know what it is about you. There's something about you that does this to me. Like, they put the
Mhm.
blame of what's happening on the child. Like there's something wrong with you, or something unique about you that causes me to do this to you, is
Mm.
something that we hear a lot. And that sticks with a person. Like, what was it about me that caused this man to do this to me? Or if you end up identifying as bisexual or homosexual, it's like, what was it about that experience that that caused me to steer my sexuality this way? And I don't believe that that is true. I believe that sexuality is we are born with and wherever on the spectrum we are. But that is something that gets twisted in people's minds, and it's very difficult to extricate that event or series of events from who you are as a sexual being.
Wow. Thank you for saying so. I just want to pause for a moment and say thank you to everyone who's watching, listening. If you don't already follow Dude, You're Getting Well, the podcast, please subscribe there so you can be the first person to find out when these episodes release and get to hear more. This is Amy Bliss, and we're talking about sexual trauma and solutions for men. If you know anyone who could use this, please share it with them. Please comment. If you have any questions for us, there is no taboo question. Please comment, send me a message. Here's Amy's information we have posted here right now. You can go to thewarriorcore.com. That's THE warrior, CORE.com, or Amy at thewarriorcore.com. If you forget that, you can always reach out to us and we'll put you in touch. And we are thrilled to have Amy speaking on this very topic, and being able to help so many men, and all people are coming to this conference, DudeCon 2024. So if you don't have your tickets yet, be sure to sign up. Amy, I want to dive right back into what we were talking about here around this, and men being able to, around sexual trauma and why we're talking or not. And one of the last things you said was, men are, most of the men statistically so far who are reported as or identify as perpetrators, maybe the
Mhm.
hunters of this, the are identify as heterosexual.
Mhm.
And just for me right then, I couldn't help but think about the fact that again, that seems like another symptom of not allowed to be any other way.
Yeah.
My father, who was an openly gay Episcopalian minister, said at his time in the 90s, 90% of the Catholic preachers he knew were gay. And I really believed him. He was drawn to the church to learn to love himself and nurture the hetero side of himself, and also finally came to a point where he believed he was loved by God, and that all people are, no matter who you are, but the how much we try to change ourselves in order to be loved or fit into society or the norms, including a man who my father always knew he was attracted to men in his life and really suppressed that down. And it took him 50 years to even identify that he had sexual trauma, that he was abused by his grandfather. And to be able, what was exceptional is that like 50-year-old man started a sexual 12-step group for anyone who's experienced, a recovery group for survivors of sexual abuse,
Mhm.
and for men and women, for everyone. And I just wonder if we were all allowed to be ourselves a little bit more,
Yeah.
if we felt permission to. I don't know what we'd have to create in our society for everyone to feel a little more permission to be themselves, but if we did, would that help stop some of this abuse? I feel like what is repressed is the thing that becomes expressed, right?
Yeah.
It's like Papa Mole. So you said earlier, it's going to come out somewhere, right? So
Mhm.
what are some of the ways you've seen it come out? Or,
Yeah.
anything else you wanna share about that I said?
Yeah. There was something that came up there that, what was it? Where'd it go? It'll come back. One of the things, or okay, let me ask, when you say, how does it come out? Can you rephrase
Like, what
that?
are the other ways it might express itself if we're not, you said physical violence,
Yeah.
inward, uh, I assume more abuse, right?
Yeah.
Passing it on.
Yes. I mean,
Um,
there's definitely the hurt people hurt people. I
yeah.
think the violence can be outward or inward. I know there are people that self-harm. I think that there's a high suicide rate among men who've experienced this, because they just don't have anywhere else to put it. It can turn into, just completely shutting down and, not putting yourself out there in a sexual way at all.
Mm,
Or it can be, not even having the ability to engage in any kind of sexual activity. I know people who, had to literally be stumbling drunk in order to engage in any kind of sexual activity, just to repress the things that would come up from any kind of sexual touch.
mm,
And that's horrible. I mean, um there's so much that we get from being sexual beings, from the intimacy with other people, that there's so much healing and health in that space
yeah,
that these people are denied. And oh, I know what I wanted to say is that I think that there's this is when, especially when it is targeted towards someone under the age of 18. So we'll talk about boys here. Is there that repression? So I have heard that statistic as well, that a lot of men gravitate towards the clergy as a way to hide or mask their sexuality, and
mm,
oftentimes that is, something along the gay or bi spectrum. And they have access, especially within the Catholic Church, where for years it was just altar boys and they were alone with boys for a long time, and they had access. But the other thing is, as is the case with any sexual trauma, oftentimes it's not about the sex or the sexual contact, but more about control and power.
hmm.
So,
Say
and
more about
that's
that.
yeah, so that's so we've there's been a lot of research around, what causes people to be predators in that space, and oftentimes it is a desire for power or control, whether it's something that's been lacking in their lives, or, something that they hate about themselves and are lashing out. But it's about that wanting to have that power and that dominance. And that is one of the things that I talk to men about a lot, which is this has nothing to do with you or who you are, or oftentimes even the fact of your gender. It was oftentimes an opportunity. So, which is why I think we see so much, rampant within the religious space and within like the Boy Scouts and those kind of spaces. It was, access and opportunity. And you just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that's one of the things when we go down that road of why me? Why did he pick me or she? And oftentimes it's let me finish that thought and then I'll go back. Is that oftentimes you weren't picked out of a group. Like it was really an opportunity. And you just happened to be the one that was in their sights. One of the things I do want to talk about that is largely different within the space of sexual trauma among men versus women. And this is not to exclude the non-binary people by any means. I'm talking about gender assigned at birth, because oftentimes this happens when you're a child. Is that with sexual trauma of boys, it often is somebody in a or in a position of authority. So it is clergy, coaches, teachers. You have that authority figure, which adds another layer to it. A lot of the sexual trauma against women is opportunity and access, and the sexual trauma in men is more about people that are in a position of power, and they can exert a lot of influence over that person because of their position.
Right. Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know many people who even Anthony Edwards speaks about his acting coach, who was that Predator. And, you see that often in someone in some role of where there's a power dynamic that's at play. And gosh, there's a movie I saw recently. God, it's not coming to my forefront, but it was a teenage girl who was falling in love with her teacher. He's in his 40s, and he started having an affair with her. And then towards the end of the movie, like, it was actually the other way around. It was a young man having, and the teacher was a woman, and she started having an affair with him, and then still blamed it on him at the end of the day. And he had, like, everyone thought they were insane and she was insane. I think this was on the news, actually. Yeah, it was based on the real story of the teacher. Yeah, from years ago. So there's a really I don't know if you know the name of the movie.
I don't know the name of the movie, but I know the pair, because she went to jail and they end up having kids together, and she got out and they got married and now they're divorced. And it was this whole
they
thing.
had kids together. Yeah.
And that's actually part of the trauma, especially in those situations. If it is she
was like, "Oh, you always had a part in it," and he was just confused because she was never responsible as the adult in her position.
Exactly. I think I can't remember if he was like 12 or 13 when they started. Maybe
13, I
13,
believe.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah, or 12. It was something really different.
Right. And here's the thing is, if we were to tell that story and it is an adult male having an affair with it's not an affair, it's abuse, but having a sexual relationship, a sexual experience, I'm trying to find the right words here, with a 13-year-old girl, there is no doubt in anybody's mind that that is wrong and that she is a victim and that is rape. But when we switch the genders and it's a adult woman having a sexual encounter with a 13-year-old boy, then it starts to get gray in a lot of our minds. It's like, well, and he's starting to, and it's the gender doesn't matter. If it is wrong when it's an adult male and a 13-year-old girl, it is wrong when it is an adult woman and a 13-year-old boy. But oftentimes what ends up happening is some people actually celebrate that. They're like patting him on the back and like, oh, you're a man now and you got her,
Yeah.
and so we're totally ignoring the trauma there. He is not emotionally and likely physically ready for that kind of an experience that
Yeah.
has been forced upon him, whether it
Mm,
was violently forced or not, it was forced upon him. And we never talk about the trauma that situation creates in him.
hmm. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad we're talking about it today. And
Right.
I'm really excited for for your talk, for the opportunity that we're going to have to hear you at DudeCon. So I know there's also a lot of solution. We've gotten into a little bit of that today,
Mhm.
but I just want to say, is there anything around that you'd want to leave people with today around, like, some of this can be quite heavy and it's important.
Yes.
So inside of like what we can do today, and obviously speaking to someone you can trust, you could even uh speak to any one of us.
Mhm.
But what might you want to say around, you're also a sex and intimacy coach. So is there anything you might want to have us think about that we could use, like, kind of turn our pain into our purpose now, or have some fun with this? Because I know I have friends who make some of their traumas their kinks as well,
Mhm.
and try to kind of work with it. I've heard of role playing in that way, and things that feel taboo but actually can be really therapeutic. So is there anything that you might want to say for people who are feeling constrained and their sexuality, and what could we start to do?
Yeah, yeah, thank you. The first thing I wanna say is, and I think I started with this, is you are not what happened to you. That is separate from who you are as a human being and who you are as a sexual being. And that there is a possibility, for a vibrant, healthy, yummy sex life after trauma. And it can be a process to get there, but it is possible. And it is possible to separate what happened to you from who you are as a sexual being. And I love that you brought up kink, because the kink space can be very, very healing for a lot of people. And
For
I
anyone
think
who
that,
doesn't know what the kink space is, can you elaborate on that?
yeah, the kink space involves a lot of different things. It can be the power dynamic. We think of like the dom sub dynamic, bondage, that type of thing. There's a tactile part of kink, which is engaging your senses. So that can be impact play, temperature play, withholding. So the kind of that tease, push, pull. The poly space lives within the kink space. There's a whole brand of kink that's around taboo. All the things that are, that you're not supposed to do, and like the possibility of getting caught, those kind of things, that kind of taboo space. So there's so much. I mean, that's a whole nother topic.
Yeah, 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 of course.
That's a whole nother episode. But
But
the
some people may not even be aware that that's available to them.
yes.
So I just wanted
Yeah.
to say that, because I think my experience, there seems to be still quite a bit of taboo around even like saying kink in public.
Mhm.
Like, what's your kink? Like, some people are like, we don't like, we don't talk about that out loud. Like,
Right.
and nor
Yeah.
have I ever told my partner who's sitting right next to me. Right. So there's that
Right.
sometimes too.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And I mean, that is the kink space is becoming more and more accepted in society. But there is still a lot of shame around that. And that's another aspect of this that can come up, is that that experience of what happened, the traumatic experience, can actually awaken some desires in the kink space. And that tie to this horrible thing that happened can lead to a lot of shame and guilt in that space. And again, I want to
Mhm.
say that those are two separate things. And I also want to say that for those of you out there that are like wondering, like, I'm feeling something, but, trauma doesn't have to be what I call big T trauma. So that doesn't necessarily have to involve a loss of control or violence, there's a lot of little t trauma out there that we put on men in the sexual space that can add up over time into what feels like big T trauma in your body.
Mm,
Denying aspects of your sexuality, overriding your desires to do something that someone else is wanting of you. Those can be traumas, and all of that can be worked through. And I do want to say, as a coach in that space, that I or someone like me can absolutely help, but therapy is an amazing outlet as well. Most of the people that I work with are also in therapy, and I can work with the therapist so that we can, create something in tandem. But the last thing I want to say is, if something happened to you and you are wanting to seek healing in that space, I don't ever need to know what happened to you. We can work together and
mm,
separate your experience from who you are as a sexual being without me ever knowing what happened. And
mm,
so if that is a fear that is holding you back from seeking help, of not wanting to talk about it, we don't have to. I can help you move through the who you are as a sexual being aspect of it without ever having to talk about it. I would still highly encourage anyone to seek therapy as well, but we don't have to ever talk about it.
mm. Thank you. That's great information to
Yeah.
know. And I really appreciate that I think so many men I talk to are still scared to even be in a men's group because they're like, I don't want to share all that stuff with other men. And I said, well, you don't have to. You could just come listen and probably get quite a bit of healing out of it. But you can share whatever you're comfortable with, and you get
Yeah.
to just be who you are. And I think that's what I really hear you standing for, is like that we get to have our experiences, our traumas, and still have a full life, and even maybe learn how to integrate some of that.
Yeah. Can I
Um,
say one more thing about
yeah.
that, which I meant to say earlier, which is that because we don't talk about this, and because so many men suffer in silence, most men who have experienced some sort of sexual trauma in their life think that they're the only one. And that's
Mm,
why I share those numbers of 1 in 6, 1 in 5, 1 in 4. And when you're ready, I would highly encourage you to talk about this in group, because if you think about it, for example, I was part of a retreat that was 6 days over 2 weekends. And there were 17 men there were like, I think 16 women, 17 men in this particular group. And one of the men stood up on the very first day and said, "This happened to me." And that was my friend who was 11 years old, that he talks about this very openly. By the end of those 6 days, 5 more men stood up. And some of them on the very last day, they were like, "I need to say this, and this is the last day." 5 more men, which means 6 out of 17 men had been sexually abused at some point in their life. That's more than 1 in 3. So there can be a lot of healing, and it's really, really scary to be that first person to stand up and say, "This happened to me." But you will probably find that that gives other men permission to say, "Yeah, it happened to me too." And there's so
mm,
much healing and support that can be found in groups like that, where there is permission to then it moves from being a safe space to being a brave space.
mm.
And I know that so many of those men are now on their healing journeys because they stood up, and for I think 4 out of 6 of them, it was the first time they'd ever vocalized it to another human being.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for saying that and speaking to the power of men's work, because I feel like I
Yeah.
talk about it all the time. Here at Dude Nation, the group we love to support is Dude School, that we celebrate. It's a men's group that is always recurring every season. Amy's been a guest speaker there. She'll be here again. She's a part of this organization because I love her and I want to bring her in as much as I can. And also, I really want to encourage everyone listening to get a ticket to DudeCon. It is $1. And if you spend $49 and upgrade to the VIP, you get the recordings for life. you can hear the speakers, but you actually can come in and talk to Amy live, ask her questions. We have an exhibitor lounge where you can hang out with the different speakers. You can hear a lot of different aspects of masculinity, things you may not have ever even thought of. And it's not just for men. It is specialized and customized for men, and all genders are really welcome. We have everyone from Amy also speaking to, we have a former NFL player, Marcus Ogden. We have a non-binary published author speaking, Jacob Kelly, speaking on queer masculinity. And so there's a lot of different spaces we have. So no matter how you identify as a dude, what you're curious about, or the parts of you maybe that you haven't really looked at, or the parts you have and you want to get more information, this is a great place to come do it. And so I highly encourage you to do that, so that you could be one of the first people, because we have a limited, there's 400 people allowed. We have a limited amount of tickets, and I really want Amy to have a full audience. I'm going to be there, so I'd love for you to come join me. So we posted it right here. It's thedudenation.com/DudeCon 2024, because yes, we do plan to do this again, but right now this is a one-time only event. So now's the time. Tomorrow's not promised, and we only have today. So thank you, Amy, for being part of this solution and joining us today and joining us at DudeCon. I learned so much from being in your presence, and I just appreciate how generous you are with your time and your wisdom and your experience. So I hope we help someone today. And if you're that someone, let us know. Please be in touch with us. Amy, you have any parting words for us?
I'm just take that first step. Take that first step on your healing journey. There is so many wonderful things out there waiting. Just take that first step.
Yes. Yeah. Amen to that. Dude, you're getting well.